I want to share with you a story. And we're going to introduce a rather difficult topic, which may make some of you uncomfortable, but we'll see where we get to. This is the story of one Haim Shapiro. Haim Shapiro went through the 7 levels of hell. He started out the war in Czechoslovakia. For those of you who know your history, the Holocaust started early in Czechoslovakia. Hitler took it over in 1938. He ended up in 4 different camps. He started out the war with 8 children. 7 of them did not survive the war. He finally finished the war, 1945, liberated from Buchenwald, with his only remaining son, Baruch Shapiro. Those of us in our generation think that the Holocaust ended in 1945. The Holocaust did not end in 1945. Because if you're a survivor and you're sitting in a DP camp, which is basically the same camps, except now they have British or American or Russian guards, and maybe the food's a little better and there's medical care, and you have no job, and you really have no family, and you have no place to go, what do? They languished in Poland and eventually Germany for the better part of 2 years, and eventually in 1948 they managed to get themselves aboard one of the illegal immigrant ships that was coming to Israel. They landed under the nose of the British, and they snuck ashore in 1948 in the middle of the War of Independence. Baruch Shapiro volunteered to fight. They took him off to a ravine. They gave him a rifle. They showed him how to shoot a few bullets, and off he went to war. After everything he'd been through, he was determined to finally have his chance to fight back. And Haim Shapiro, with a little money from the Joint Distribution Committee, rented himself a small apartment outside of Tel Aviv. And one afternoon, Baruch Shapiro distinguished himself. He was part of the Palmach. He actually served under Yitzhak Rabin, fighting to break the siege on Jerusalem. One day, Haim Shapiro is sitting in his little apartment, and he sees a delegation walking up the path to his house. Now, I want you to know, I never really fully understood this story. I first saw this story in the Jerusalem Post. It was written by a rabbi by the name of Stuart Weiss, and did a little research, found actually a grave in Har Herzl, so I do believe this story is true, but if it isn't true, it should be, and it probably is somewhere else. I never really fully understood the story until years after I finished the army, and my mother once remarked to me, the summer of, I believe it was 84, my brother and I, my older brother and I were both in the Israeli army at the same time. He was in Sanchanim, he was in the paratroopers, he was stationed in a place called Tzidon, which became known as Tzir HaMavet, death row, because they were losing another paratrooper every day. I was in the Bekaa Valley opposite the Syrians. We would occasionally get out at the same time and trade stories about how we narrowly missed death or which buddy of ours wasn't coming home. And my parents decided there was no way they were sitting in America that summer, so they came to Israel, and they were in an apartment that summer on King George Street. And one day my mother told me that she came downstairs to do some shopping. Those of you who know Jerusalem, there's a Super Soul at the top of Agron near King George. She was going to do some grocery shopping. She comes out of the building, and she sees one of these delegations. There's usually a kaban, a k'tzin briut nefesh, like an army psychologist. There's a nurse. There's someone carrying that horrible brown envelope. And if you've ever seen one of these delegations, people just go quiet. Everybody just gets out of the way. Traffic even stops. And she sees them walking up the path to the building. And she didn't know what to do. She had not one, she had 2 sons on the front lines. She didn't have the courage to go over and ask them, but she couldn't very well go shopping. So she got back into the elevator. And she told me that the longest moment of her entire life was the amount of time it took this army nurse to lift her finger and to stop at the 5th button instead of the 6th. They were going to the Bar Kokhba family. So Haim Shapiro is sitting in his apartment, and he sees one of these delegations coming up the path. They say he opened the door before they knocked. They say he never even read the telegram. He just crumpled it in his hands. You have to understand, this is it. The end of the line. What Hitler didn't finish ended on the roads to Yerushalayim with his last remaining son. He had one request. You know, the Israeli army does everything. Can I speak up? I don't believe anybody's ever asked me to speak louder in my lifetime. Okay, fair enough. Thank you. All right, good for you. You must be from Brooklyn, no? No, just... So he's sitting in his apartment, and he sees this delegation, and they come up to the door, and he crumples it again in his hand. They give him that horrible telegram. He had one request. He wanted that his son should be buried in Har Herzl in Jerusalem, Israel's military cemetery. He had actually never made it to Jerusalem. He wanted him at least to be buried in Jerusalem. People heard of the story. It was the middle of a war. Israel was fighting for its survival. But this was unique. This was the end of a line. So hundreds of people showed up to the funeral. Yigal Yadin, who was the chief of staff of the Israeli army, who would later be famous for discovering Masada, stood by his side. And in the middle of the funeral, as the flag-draped coffin is being lowered into the ground, Haim Shapiro starts to sing. People thought Nebuch had lost it. Last remaining son. Somebody ran to get him a bottle of water. Yigal didn't put his arm around him. People say it's okay. Maybe you want to sit down. He shrugs them all off and finally he says, you don't understand. He says, I lost 7 sons in Europe. I lost almost 70 relatives. I lost my wife. I lost my parents. I lost my in-laws, everybody. I have no place to mourn them. They're dust over Europe. And I have no idea why they were taken. He said, this son, at least this son, is being buried in Jerusalem. And at least I know why he died. He died so that we could have a Jewish Jerusalem. He says, that's not a reason to cry. That's a reason to sing. And he begins to sing. And as a flag-draped coffin against the setting sun is lowered into the ground in Har Herzl in Jerusalem, 300 Jews begin to sing and then to dance. And that is Jewish history in a nutshell. The problem is that it raises a rather difficult question. Why are we paying this price? Why do we need to do this? You know, we all talk about Zionism, Tzionut. When I was 18, I went to Israel to learn for a year. I was all set. I had gotten into Columbia. I was going to go to university. I was going to do law. And then I caught the bug. And I decided to stay a second year. And then I decided, just couldn't see waking up every morning, oh God, bring us back to Jerusalem, when you can just get on a plane and go there. So I decided I wanted to stay in Israel, and I thought if I'm going to stay in Israel, I should do the right thing. So I stayed, I volunteered, I went to the army. I eventually ended up as an officer, as a company commander, and I lost my share of buddies. And you got to ask yourself a question that people are uncomfortable asking. Is it worth it? Why are we paying this price? Why do we need a Jewish state? Now, I don't want to make anybody here uncomfortable, but you know what? You've got a great Jewish state here. The Jewish state of Johannesburg. It's wonderful. You got kosher restaurants. Somebody wants to meet me tomorrow. We don't even see if there's kosher food anymore. I said, I want to go to a place with kosher food that has Wi-Fi. You know, it has to be perfect. Your kids can choose amazing Jewish schools. You've imported this unbelievable Jewish entity here. You have a phenomenal thing going. You're exporting Shabbat to the whole world. It's unbelievable. You know, we have a yeshiva called Oraita. It's in the Jewish Quarter. And a couple years ago, and I've been following these incredible emails and posts on the net about the Shabbat project. And I remember when it started, I was like, oh, that's a new idea. Start a Shabbat project. Who's going to be interested in that? And here we are, hundreds of thousands of people. It's unbelievable. So we decided, this is a great idea. If everybody's doing Shabbat, why don't we do it at the same time? So we worked it out that Shabbat, the guys were in yeshiva, and instead of being in yeshiva, we went into the Rova Square. And we davened, and we set up some it was unbelievable. Dozens of people came over, wanted to share Shabbat. Would never have thought of that, to be honest. Except that in South Africa, they're doing Shabbat. So why do you need a Jewish state? Now, I want you to understand, not everybody thinks you need a Jewish state. Without getting into politics, there is a significant cohort that thinks Israel shouldn't be a Jewish state. I don't know, Yossi Beilin, he was one of the architects of Oslo. You can agree with his politics, you can disagree with his politics. You have to give him credit for being consistent. He believes Israel should be a state, like every state. There should be Jewish Israelis and Arab Israelis and Swedish Israelis and Thai Israelis and so on. So why do you need a Jewish state? Now, if you had to pick a reason the most obvious reason that in 1948 we had to have a Jewish state, and why, to play safe, we still need a Jewish state, what would that be? Anybody? Exactly right. A haven for Jewish people. We need to know that it can never happen again. That no matter what happens in the world, there's now a place where a Jew can go. You can get on a plane tomorrow, you can land in Israel, you can say, I want to live here. And if you're Jewish, you have a place to go. And we know that in 1939 and 1940 and 1941, Hitler originally did not want necessarily to destroy the Jews. He just wanted them out of Europe. Nobody wanted them. As late as 1944, there were 400,000 Jews in Hungary, and they were headed for the gas chambers of Auschwitz. And a fellow by the name of Joel Brand, and this is documented in a number of books, one of them, While 6 Million Died, highly recommended reading, although not if you're a fan of America. And Joel Brand managed to get to Adolf Eichmann. And Adolf Eichmann said, Yimach Shemo, that he would be willing to free the 400,000 Jews of Hungary. They could go wherever they want for 400 trucks, because that was the big problem. They weren't able to supply their front lines. They were too busy using their trains to murder the Jews. And Joel Brand basically went around the world. He was eventually arrested. And no one wanted us. Now think about this for a minute. If 400,000 Jews are not worth 400 trucks, then 1,000 Jews are not worth a truck. What does that mean one Jew is not worth? A tire? A steering wheel? So there has to be a place where we can go. There's a problem with this. The problem with this is twofold. One is, I have a hard time viewing 3,000 years of Jewish aspirations to the land of Israel as the need for a sophisticated bunker. Is that really all Zionism is? Is that all the state of Israel is? Just in case? And I'll go you one further. What if you don't think there's going to be a Holocaust? Notwithstanding the horrendous news stories that are coming out of America in St. Louis and Philadelphia. I just saw this happened again, I think over Shabbos in Brooklyn. They found an easy target. They're targeting cemeteries. They can't take on Jewish lives anymore, so they're attacking our dead. But I don't really believe, if you ask the average Jew in America, I don't know South Africa as well, but I'd be willing to venture it's true here as well. Nobody here believes that there's a Holocaust waiting around the corner. The overwhelming majority of American Jewry does not believe that this Holocaust can happen again in America, and they'll give you all sorts of theories. They'll tell you America is a melting pot. They'll tell you there's so many different cultures, everybody's a stranger. So if there is no fear of a Holocaust, then I don't really need the state of Israel. Why do we need a Jewish state? It's an interesting question. And I'll tell you what's a little more frightening, and this is just perspective, you can agree or disagree. When I ask Jewish teenagers this question, none of them seem to be able to answer it. Now, just to be clear, I don't want anybody to misinterpret this, God forbid. I'm asking teenagers in Israel from America, not really from South Africa. Nobody should assume this is an indictment of our Jewish educational system. It's not. This is a compound issue. It's partly the community, all of us. Why do we need a Jewish state? What's the purpose of having a Jewish state? So I want to share with you an idea. And I actually want to leave time for questions because I'd be interested to hear what you think. And I don't believe that a rabbi has ever gotten into trouble for speaking less than he was allotted. But I want to share with you an idea. When I was 19, and I was struggling with this decision, and just for the record, I don't think it's healthy to judge people based on what they do or don't do. I think it's important to be non-judgmental. I don't judge anybody here for not going to Israel, for not living in Israel. There are lots of good reasons to live overseas. You have family. Sometimes family isn't well. There might be a parnasa, a livelihood question. I think when we look at the big picture, though, not the individual Jew or family or community, but the Jewish people. After 2,000 years of dreaming, we finally have a home. And for whatever the reason, most of the Jewish people are still not coming. That at least should cause us to wonder. That's a challenge. And by the way, this is not a new phenomenon. We're about to celebrate the festival of Purim. Some of you may know that on Purim, the Jewish people had a very easy out. They had an opportunity because, without getting into the specifics, Cyrus, Koresh, who had been the emperor of Persia and Media, decreed that the Jews could go home and they could start building the temple. And Nehemiah, and the last vestige of the kings of Judea, a fellow by the name of Zerubbabel, were building the temple. And the Jews could go, and most of them didn't. And when the Purim story was over, the Jews are still in Persia. It's not exactly the ideal from the biblical perspective. And Ezra, finally, Ezra does not go up to Jerusalem until after the temple is finished. He stays in Babylon. Can you imagine? They're building the temple. They're building the temple. And people aren't going. And he finally gets 50,000 Jews to come back with him. He has to coerce many of them. He pushes them. Hundreds of thousands, some say possibly as many as 3.5 million Jews remain in Babylon. They never go. So this question is not a new question. Do we go home or do we stay? Where is home? Are we Jewish South Africans or are we South African Jews? So I want to share with you an idea. And this idea for me was fundamental and is worth considering. The first individual who is told that it's time to go is Abraham. Abraham comes onto the world scene when he's 75 years old. Okay? We have no dialogue and no history and no record of him almost, except for the fact that his father Terach takes him on a journey at the end of the previous portion of Noach. We know nothing about him. Rabbinic legend, the Medrash, kind of fills us in a little bit. His father had an idol store. Abraham was bothered by this. He gets to break all the idols. He puts the hammer in the big idol's hands. You have to break your idols maybe before you can find something real. Okay. So what's the first thing God says to Abraham? First thing Hashem says to Abraham, he doesn't say, this is the only monotheist in the world, at least ostensibly. There's no one else. You would think Hashem would say, listen, come on in, sit down, we're going to have some coffee. No. What's the first word he says to him? Lech, go. That's crazy. You meet the girl of your dreams, you're so excited, you're set up on a date. You finish the date, you say to her, go. It's just strange. But it doesn't just say lech, it says lech lecha. Go to you. Rashi says a fascinating thing. Rashi is a super commentary on the Bible, 1040 to 1105, lived in medieval Europe. You can't study Torah without studying Rashi. And Rashi says, litovatcha ulahanatcha. I want you to go for your good and for your benefit. This is going to be good for you. And God actually promises Abraham 3 things. He says to him, if you go to Israel, escha lagoy gadol, I'm going to make you a great nation. Avarechecha, I'm going to make you wealthy. And I'm going to give you progeny. You're going to have children. Abraham is 75 years old. He has no money. He has no fame. He has no children. He's a nachschlepper nebuch. And God's self, comes to him and says, I'm going to make you rich. I'm going to make you famous. It's going to be awesome. Who wouldn't go? Of course you go. And by the way, if you look at the portion in which this appears, God then sets about fulfilling his promises. Avram goes down to Egypt, becomes wealthy. He has a son through a second wife, Ishmael. He's eventually promised a son, Yitzchak. Everything's going great. So this idea of this tremendous self-sacrifice doesn't seem to really be what's going on. What does it mean that I want you to do this not for me, I want you to do this for you? Like when I went to the army, to be honest, I really wasn't doing it for me. And if I wasn't sure whether I was doing it for me, the first night in the army, you're not doing this for you. It was actually the first time in my life, it suddenly hit me. I just opted to do something that I can't get out of. Like you go to summer camp, if you're really not happy, mom will bring you home. If you go to the high school and it's terrible, you can play hooky Sunday morning, right? But this is it, you're in. No, don't do this for me, says Hashem. Do this for you. What happened to the Mishnah and Ethics of the Fathers teaches, don't be like a servant who serves in order to get reward. Rather be like a servant who serves not for reward. Just because it's the right thing to do. No, don't do it because it's the right thing to do. Do it for you. So what does that mean? Now, in order to understand this, we have to understand another concept. Have you ever felt uncomfortable with the idea of being part of... Switching mics, this is very cool. Can you hear me? No. Now you can. We're just checking out the tech guys. Okay. Have you ever felt uncomfortable with the concept of being part of the chosen nation? We're the chosen people. Like, did you ever walk into a business meeting and some people there are Jewish and some people are not? And you kind of sit down and say, by the way, part of the chosen people. It doesn't really roll off your tongue, right? And yet we say this every day. Every time somebody goes up to the Torah, makes a blessing, blessed are you, O God, who chose us. Chosen, right? What does that mean? People make a mistake, and they assume that to be chosen means somehow that you're better than everybody else. That's not true. Think about this for a minute. The idea of being chosen means that you're chosen for something. Now, how do I know that I'm chosen for something? Because I'm here. Hashem created me. There must be a reason that I'm here, and I have to figure out what that is. So to be chosen isn't better. To be chosen just means you have a purpose. Every nation has a purpose because every nation is created by God and every nation is here for a reason. It's not my job to figure out what the purpose of the Chinese is. They've got a lot of work on their hands. Our job is to figure out what we're doing here. And to be chosen means that you have a mission. Now it gets interesting. Because you see, there are two different types of entity in the world. Okay? There are religions and there are nations. Now what's a religion? A religion is a group of people that share common ideas, common principles, and are willing to live by them. Okay? If you're a Christian, you don't believe in Buddha, because if you believe in Buddha, you're not a Christian. Now, you could be a French Christian, you could be an African Christian, you can be an American Christian. There's lots of different types of Christians. Christians share certain ideals. And then you have a nation. Now, what's a nation? This is interesting. The definition of a nation is a group of people that share a place. Every people that is in a particular place is a nation by virtue of the fact that they have a place. So the Americans are an American nation because they live in America, right? The English are English because they live in England. Now you put an Englishman in the middle of Nevada, he's just a guy with a funny accent. But he's not really an Englishman anymore, and his kids certainly won't be English. Even the French are a nation. They really have funny accents, but that's okay. And every nation has something to contribute to the world. Now it gets interesting. Apparently, in order for a group of people to contribute to the world as a nation, they have to be in that place. The French were put together in that place for whatever the reason. It's not accidental that the French nation isn't in the middle of the Sahara. They would have had a hard time producing French wine in the Sahara. Part of who they are is being in France. I think where the world gets confused, and maybe sometimes we get confused, is that the Jewish people is both. We're a religion and we're a nation. We share common ideas, common goals, common principles, common dogma, right? If someone believes that there are many gods, then that's not a Jewish belief, right? If someone believes that might makes right, that's not a Jewish belief. And so wherever you are in the world, if you accept those Jewish beliefs, that makes you part of Judaism. But we're also a nation. It's not accidental that for 2,000 years, we never gave up our dream of coming home. Because without our land, there's something missing. And it gets interesting because in order to achieve our purpose, we can only fully achieve our purpose as a Jewish people in the land of Israel. And that's why every prayer, every wedding ceremony, every time we grace after meals, every Jewish home contains deep within it the idea, the dream, the yearning to be back in the land of Israel. And it's not because we want to take Israeli buses. It's because together in that place, we can do something special. And what is it that's so special that we're meant to do in that place? We're meant to be an or lagoyim. We're meant to be a light. I'm not 100% convinced that we're the only people that are meant to be a light. It may be there are other nations that have what to share with the world. I think they do. But the Jewish people are meant to share something with the world. And there is a limit to how much we can share that until we are back in our own land and in our own space. And that's why there needs to be a Jewish nation. And I'll give you one example. Does it switch over? Look at that. In 1982, on a Sunday morning, I still remember this vividly. Saturday night, I was in Ra'anana for Shabbat with my brother, and he went into the army earlier than me. He was already in. And we were listening to the news on the bus. We knew something was up because we got on the bus in Israel and nobody was pushing. That was a little strange. And everybody was quiet. That was even stranger. And we were listening to the news, right? The Israelis are fanatical about news. Have you ever noticed this? Right? Every hour they get this boop, 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 boop. And everybody shuts up. Everybody's listening. Why are they listening? Because before you send your taxes in, you want to be sure the country's still there. Okay. So I get on the bus and everybody's listening. And we start listening to interviews. They're talking to children who spent the entire weekend in bomb shelters in the north. And Katyushas are falling. And you all know the recipe. Unfortunately, not the last time this has happened. And the next morning, 20,000 troops crossed the border. They waved to the UN as they passed by and went into Lebanon. And for the better part of 20 years, they estimate over 250,000 men spent a minimum of 3 months in Lebanon. That is unbelievable. But you know what's even more unbelievable? In almost 20 years, 250,000 Israeli soldiers, and I'm not even talking about guys who go up there for a week or two of reserve duty. 20 years, 250,000 men. There was not one reported case of rape. Not one. Not by the Israeli army, not by the Red Cross, not by the Red Crescent, not one. You can read about them in Arab textbooks, but you won't find an actual report. In that statistic, the Israeli army is a Jewish army. Now, don't get me wrong. This talk is not about the Israeli army, and I'm not saying that's a simple question. That's a different topic, but that's the goal. And if you wonder why people pay such attention, have such an issue, is the Israeli army an ethical army, and why are we being held to higher standards, which we definitely are? It's because that's who we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be better. We're supposed to be a role model. You can't be a role model of what a society is meant to be unless you are a society. Unless you can create a country that includes taxes and police and fire and schools and sewage treatment and electricity. And that's the dream. So yes, we need a Jewish state. The world needs a Jewish state. The world needs to see, not because we're better, because for whatever the reason Hashem decided, we've been given that challenge. The world needs to see what a country could be. How special a country could be. How you can live in a desert and you can go to Africa and teach them how to irrigate their fields. How you can send satellites in the air with 0.0001% of the technology of the world. And the list is endless. You can look it up online. So I challenge you, all of you. I was talking to somebody in the hall before, and he was telling me he has a sister or something in Jerusalem and another one somewhere else in the country. We all have relatives there. And I said, oh, that's great. I said, when was the last time you saw them? He said, I visited 3 years ago. I said to him, 3 years? You haven't visited Israel in 3 years? Wow. Now, don't get me wrong. I live in my ivory tower. We're spoiled. It's unbelievable what it is to live in Israel. Come, visit, take part in this, see what it is. Be a part of building the most incredible experiment in the last 2,000 years. Thank you. So I purposely left 7 minutes because I wanted to leave some time for questions. And if anybody has a question and you're willing to shout it out, I'm more than happy to answer. Anybody? Because I know this is a loaded topic. Any questions? No guts, no glory? Anybody have a question? Yes. Stand up. Stand up. We were offered Uganda. Oh, that's a very interesting question. Just to fill everybody in, and then you, sir, who stood up. In the Second Zionist Congress, if I'm getting my facts right, there was a proposal, there are actually a number of proposals, one of them was Grant Island in America, to create a Jewish state not in the land of Israel. The advantage to choosing Uganda, by the way, Theodore Herzl voted for Uganda. One of the proposals which had the most momentum was to create a Jewish state in Uganda. The British offered the territory of Uganda to create a Jewish state, to solve the Jewish problem, to create the bunker. Now, on the one hand, we look back and we say to ourselves, can you imagine if they would have chosen Uganda? Like, who would go to Uganda? What would have happened? But I'll tell you something interesting. If we had gone to Uganda, maybe there wouldn't have been a Holocaust, because there would have been a place to go. And you kind of wonder why the Jewish people intuited and sensed that that wasn't our place. Now, without getting into politics, archaeologically, historically, theologically, existentially, we came from that place. We were born of that place. We've yearned for 2,000 years to go home to that place. Home is such an incredible world for a people that have been wandering the face of the globe for so long. I think the Jewish people understood that that was not going to be home. And there are many examples of this, by the way. Yes, sir. Okay, so just to repeat your question, I don't deny that Israel is our home. What do we do with the other people that are there already? Okay, so without getting too deep into politics, I'm going to give you a radical idea. In order to make peace, there's one very simple thing you need, okay? You need to have someone who wants to make peace with you. I actually don't believe that the issue is that there isn't enough room in one place for both groups of people. Come visit me in my home, I live in Efrat, and look out at the mountains. It's unbelievable how much space there is. Believe me, there is more than enough room in the land of Israel for Jews and Arabs to live together. By the way, when Abraham dies, maybe some of you remember this, there's a beautiful verse. It says, Vayikberu oto Yitzchak v'Yishmael banav. Yitzchak and Yishmael bury Abraham. And Rashi there points out that the order is incorrect. Yishmael was born first. It should say that Ishmael and Isaac bury him. Why does it list Yitzchak first? Because Yishmael makes peace with the fact that Yitzchak had a different mission. And Rashi there comments, and there are many authorities who say the same thing, that the day will come when the Jews and the Arabs will learn to live together in peace. I believe that's true. I think one day we will live in peace. The problem is twofold. Number one, if you had to pick the greatest problem in the world today, the greatest problem in the Jewish world today, my guess is some people would say the Middle East peace crisis, some people would say assimilation. I'm starting to hear that assimilation, unfortunately, is starting to rear its head in South Africa. A statistic that wasn't as sort of prominent is now becoming more prominent, and that's something to think about. I don't think assimilation is the problem. Assimilation is a symptom. It's a symptom of a problem in education. And I believe the same is true about the Middle East peace crisis. The issue is education. If you go to Arab schools, and there are organizations that do this for a living, and you see what they're putting in Arab textbooks, right, then you'll see why we have a problem. Because if 3-year-olds are being taken to summer camps and strapped with fake bombs to learn how to become suicide bombers, and if they're naming street squares after massive terrorist murderers, then how are you going to ever make peace? So we need someone to make peace with. But if we found someone who was willing to hear logically and talk peace, I'm sure we could find a solution. I don't know that we're there yet. I think that until someone, and I don't think this is Israel, decides to do an experiment, pick a city, take over the schools, teach them peace and tolerance and love and joy and Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King and raise a generation of Arab children that want to find a way to work it out. Until that happens, I think we're far away from that. So without getting into politics, yes? Well, it's interesting to me that we want to separate our biblical historical right from our political right. I don't think it's a complicated question politically. I mean, I don't think it's a complicated question legally. That's not the topic of this discussion. But if you study a little of your history, the San Remo Conference, the British Mandate included Transjordan. I don't think there's any sane person today who thinks that we should take over Transjordan. On the other hand, 72% of the population, pre-Syrian refugees, are Palestinians, whatever a Palestinian is, and so that is a Palestinian state de facto. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is that Arabs become sort of semi-autonomous, and they're able to vote, and they're able to manage Arab affairs, and Jews vote for Jews and manage Jewish affairs, and the two different municipalities and governments work together. There are lots of different possibilities, but you can't start talking solutions until you have someone to work with. That's been our challenge. It doesn't matter how brilliant a plan you come up with. You cannot impose peace on someone else. You can impose non-belligerence. You can't impose peace. Canada and America have never had a war because they both want peace and they get along. It's not complicated. Yes? I see the Jews of South Africa love politics. Okay. Okay, so how do we answer the question of a prime minister without a kippah on his head who talks about the ancient right to the land? I'll give you a very short answer. If you open up a pair of tefillin, you will find that there are 4 portions in the tefillin. Most people don't know what they are. The 2 portions of the Shema v'ahavta and Haim Shapiro. One of them is Kadesh li kol bechor, and one of them is Vayaki v'yachem la'aretz. One of the topics in those 4 portions is what's called Peter Rechem Chamor. If you own a donkey, and your donkey gives birth to a firstborn donkey, you have to redeem that donkey because it's sanctified. That is so bizarre. Why do I need in my tefillin putting on every morning to remember what to do in the event I get a donkey and it has a firstborn donkey? So Rav Kook has a magnificent idea. He says, why does it say in the Talmud that one day when Mashiach comes, he'll come ke'ani rochev al chamor, he'll come riding on a donkey? He says, what does the donkey represent? The donkey is an impure animal. It's not kosher. The Torah wants to teach us that even inside the most impure of exteriors, there is inner sanctity. I want to tell you something about Bibi Netanyahu. It's not about whether you're pro his policies or not pro his policies. I disagreed with some of what Yitzhak Rabin had to say. I will always respect him for certain things that he did. Any person who puts on an Israeli uniform and is willing to put his life on the line for the Jewish people, he has inner sanctity. He has a right to speak for me. You can agree with his policies or disagree. Better? We'll take one last question. I'm minding the timekeeper, so one last question. Anybody? Yes? How do I respond to people who say we can't have a Jewish state unless it's a religious state? Is that the question? Okay. That's a great question. I'm glad we said only one more question. Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to define what the word religious means. That's not simple to define. In fact, in Jewish texts, you will not find the term religious, right? We're meant to judge people not by the totality of who they are. Only God can know that. But by their particular actions. And I'll give you a quick example. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says that we should judge every person meritoriously. Havidan kol adam lakav zchut. That means that if you see me walking into a McDonald's and ordering a cheeseburger, you have to assume that I have some terrible illness, God forbid, that can only be cured with cheeseburgers. And in fact, it's a mitzvah. I know there are people here who want that disease, right? And there's a mitzvah for me, like, to get a cheeseburger. In fact, when you see me walking in to get a cheeseburger, just in case this happens later, you have to automatically, oh, wow, he must have the cheeseburger disease. Like, it's just natural. So that's easy to say, it's very hard to do. The very next Mishnah, the very next teaching, in Ethics of the Fathers, in the first chapter, Mishnah Zayin Chet, very next Mishnah, not off somewhere in the Jerusalem Talmud, it says, Harchek mishachen ra. Distance yourself from an evil neighbor. It's an obvious question. If you judge every person meritoriously, how do you have an evil neighbor? So Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch gives what I think is a phenomenal answer. He says, obviously there's evil in the world, right? Nobody says you should open up a yeshiva in a drug house. But don't judge the person. Judge the action. When someone does something that is incorrect, and you want to call the act, imagine a person is in a car, and he's driving, and it's Yom Kippur, and he's smoking a cigarette, and he's got a pork and cheese sandwich in the other hand, and he's listening to the radio. Come on, baby, light my fire, okay? On Yom Kippur. And he's on the way to a nursing home because he knows there's a Holocaust survivor who has no one with them that day because everybody's off for Yom Kippur. So is he religious or not religious? I don't know. The act of visiting another human being in such a fashion is a deeply religious act. The act of eating a pork and cheese sandwich on Yom Kippur is not a religious act. So now let's get back to your question. There are many things about the state of Israel that are deeply religious, and there are many things about the state of Israel that are not religious. And I find it hard to imagine that now that the largest Jewish community in the world is in Israel, for the first time in 2,000 years, that isn't God's plan. Like you want to say Hallel with a bracha or without a bracha, not to be full of praise for the fact that we live, I was in Poland a week and a half ago. You stand in those places. We were in the Umstagplatz in Warsaw. And people had to choose quickly. Do they get into this car with their mother or this car with their dad? You get off the platform, left or right. What are our choices today? Do I spend $600 for a ticket now, or do I wait and see if it goes down to $500? Like we're blessed. Could the state of Israel, and do I hope that it's headed in a better direction? Absolutely. Am I, by the way, to be perfectly honest, nervous? Because I think if it becomes what you're referring to when you talk about religious state, I don't think it's ever been healthy to force people to accept religion. Right? I'd like to see people embrace Shabbat. That's what's so beautiful about your Shabbat project. What's so beautiful about it is that people are choosing Shabbat. That's so much more meaningful than someone stuck at home not being able to get on a bus. So we have a long way to go. I would like to see a religious state that means that no one in the Knesset ever raises their voice against anyone else. I'd like to see a religious state where no one slanders anyone else. I'd like to see a religious state where old people walk down the street and everybody gets up. Then we can talk about whether it's kosher or what we do on Shabbat. So it's a little food for thought. Thank you very much. I'm going to end on time. Thank you.